So, so I was thinking of what Trump's electoral strategy would be in 2024. And I think that if he picked Nikki Haley, this would be a tremendous boost to his campaign because Nikki Haley would be very popular among neocons in Washington, D.C.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are looking at a really interesting sit-down interview where journalist Mehdi Hasan goes head-to-head with Professor Jiang, a Chinese-Canadian commentator who has been called China's Nostradamus for his geopolitical predictions. Mehdi pushes him hard on his analysis of the United States and Iran, on a failed prediction, and on whether his views are being shaped by where he lives. The back and forth gets sharp fast, and some of the things Jiang says about the war strategy might genuinely surprise you. Stick with me all the way through because the deeper this conversation goes, the more layers get peeled back, and you do not want to miss the China angle near the end. Drop a comment, and let me know what country or city you are tuning in from. I love seeing where this community pulls up from across the world. All right, let's get right into it.
Available to Americans in order to control the Strait of Hormuz. The first option is to control Karg Island, which is the oil depot of the Iranians. 90% of Iranians' oil exports depart from Karg Island. Then you have Qasim Island, which is just opposite the Strait of Hormuz. And then there's a naval base further down the coastline. And so these are the three options that the Americans have. And it is unclear which option the Americans will ultimately choose. But given the track record of the Marines, we can expect the Marines to have an early success. The problem with the strategy and the problem with America's overall strategy is what happens next? How do you maintain control over the territory that you've claimed? The reality is that the Iranians have been preparing this battle for about 20 years. They developed this very effective asymmetrical warfare strategy of using drones and ballistic missiles from afar, hidden in underground bases, to hit and strike American assets around the Middle East. This is almost like guerrilla warfare. And historically, a imperial power has had great difficulties in containing guerrilla warfare. Yeah. So unfortunately, the Americans don't have a long-term strategy of how to win this war. Trump is still hoping for a quick strike, a knockout punch. And he believes that the American Marines can deliver this knockout punch.
Liking this video? Then don't just watch, hit like, share and subscribe. And tap the bell so you never miss a video or live show. But if you want early access to exclusive content, then you have to head to zeteo.com and subscribe now. You'll be supporting fearless, independent journalism.
You have made a lot of predictions. Some have called you China's Nostradamus. How would you respond to those who say, sure, you guessed that Trump would win in 2024 and he'd go to war with Iran, but that wasn't based on geopolitical insights or game theory. People who follow American politics or world politics could have guessed that. I think I and many others were warning that Trump could win in 2024 and that he would escalate with Iran, as he did in his first term when he killed Qasem Soleimani.
Right. So I think that if you've been following the news very closely, then it was actually pretty straightforward to make these three predictions, right? Because in Trump's first term, as you mentioned, Trump did have a history of escalating conflict with Iran. The biggest escalation was when Trump ordered the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. And quite frankly, America and Iran should have gone to war during that time. But because of the escalation efforts on both sides, we prevented World War III during that time. But Trump was under tremendous pressure from his allies and from his donors to start a conflict in the Middle East. So if Trump had won a second term, then he would have started the conflict. I was pretty confident that he would start the conflict if he had won in 2020. But fortunately, he lost.
This right here is where the entire war strategy unravels, and most people watching the news every night have no idea how deep the problem actually goes, because when Professor Jang said this, the Iranians have been preparing this battle for about 20 years, that single sentence rewires how you should be thinking about everything happening in the Middle East right now. You have to understand, this is not a country that woke up one morning and decided to throw together a defense plan. 2 decades of underground bases, drone networks, ballistic missile systems, dispersed command structures, asymmetrical doctrine baked into every layer of their military, And the American administration walked into this, thinking they could solve it with a few airstrikes and a marine landing. And here is the part that blows my mind. Jiang said this: an imperial power has had great difficulties in containing guerrilla warfare. He is not pulling that out of thin air. Let me break down why this matters. Look at what happened in Vietnam. The most powerful military on Earth, unlimited budget, total air supremacy, and they could not crack a guerrilla force operating from tunnels and jungle terrain. Look at the Soviet Union in Afghanistan in the 1980s. Same story, massive conventional power, defeated by decentralized fighters who refused to play the game on the empire's terms. This is a documented historical pattern, and somehow the people in charge of foreign policy keep forgetting it every single generation. When Jiang said the Americans don't have a long-term strategy of how to win this war, that is the entire problem in one sentence. There is no end goal. There is no clear definition of victory. There is no exit plan. And then Jiang dropped the line that really stuck with me. He is still hoping for a quick strike, a knockout punch. That is the mindset of someone who watches too many action movies and not enough history documentaries. Real wars don't end with a single punch. They end with bodies, debt, and decades of regret.
And so that question then was, what is the likelihood that he would get a second term? Would he win in 2024? And then as I watched the news, it seemed pretty obvious to me that the Democrats were hopeless, that they were not delivering on the promises, that there were a lot of issues. For example, what was happening in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, that was making American voters disillusioned with the Democratic establishment. And so I thought that Trump would have a very good chance of winning in 2024. And if he won in 2024, then I think there's a very strong likelihood that he would attack Iran. And so all three predictions have panned out.
Just on your predictions, I just want to be clear here. Nikki Haley was key to your prediction about Iran. You said Trump would pick her as his running mate, and as vice president, she would pressure Trump into war with Iran. She's a notorious hawk. But he didn't pick her. And his current vice president, J.D. Vance, is widely seen as a skeptic of this war. So you admit you got that wrong?
Yes, absolutely. So I was thinking of what Trump's electoral strategy would be in 2024. And I think that if he picked Nikki Haley, this would be a tremendous boost to his campaign, because Nikki Haley would be very popular among neocons in Washington, D.C. She would also be very popular among suburban white women. That was key to Biden's victory in 2020. So I made the prediction that he would pick Nikki Haley. But at the same time, I was not completely sure about it because I also felt that J.D. Vance also had a good opportunity to be selected. And I also said during my lecture, making the prediction that Nikki Haley would be his running mate, that depending on whether or not he picked Nikki Haley or J.D. Vance, this would determine how we can foresee or understand Trump's second term. And so if he had picked Nikki Haley, then he would have been he would have been fully committed into the neocon project of regime change throughout the Middle East, of supporting Israel, of establishing American imperial power throughout the world. He didn't pick Nikki Haley. Instead, he picked the complete opposite, who is J.D. Vance, who is America first, who has always been skeptical of American imperial overreach. But not only that, but he also picked Tulsi Gabbard to be his director of national intelligence. And so these are the two major skeptics of this war in the Middle East. And what I will say about picking these two individuals is that it shows that Trump has an off-ramp strategy, where if this war goes sideways and the American public is up in arms and he's losing in the polls, then Trump may decide to pivot back to America first and have J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard elevated in the administration over individuals such as Marco Rubio and Peter Hegseth.
Yes.
So that, yeah.
I suspect he will blame Pete Hegseth if all of this goes sideways.
Oh, this part right here is where the mask comes off completely, because when Professor Jang said he was under tremendous pressure from his allies and from his donors to start a conflict in the Middle East, you have to sit with that for a second. The wars that shape global history, the wars that reshape entire regions, are not always being decided by what is good for the American people. They are being decided by who writes the biggest checks and who whispers the loudest in the right ears. And once you understand that, you can never look at foreign policy the same way again. Now I want to give Mehdi a lot of credit here, because he did something most interviewers refuse to do. He looked Jiang in the eye and said, "So you admit you got that wrong? That is real journalism. No softball, no protecting the guest, just a direct challenge on a failed prediction." And what is wild is that Jiang owned it instantly. He said yes, absolutely. That is what intellectual honesty looks like in 2026, and it is rare enough that it deserves to be pointed out. But here is what I find genuinely fascinating. Jiang turned that miss into one of the sharpest reads I've heard about the current administration. He said this: "It shows that he has an off-ramp strategy. Think about what that means. Picking J.D. Vance and Tulsi Gabbard, two people who are openly skeptical of foreign entanglements, was not an accident. It was insurance. It was hedging. It was making sure that if the war goes badly and the polls collapse, there are pre-positioned figures inside the administration to pivot the entire message overnight." And then Jiang said the line that I think every viewer needs to hear. I suspect he will blame Pete Hegseth if all of this goes sideways. That is the pattern. That has always been the pattern. When things go right, the credit goes upward. When things go wrong, somebody else gets thrown under the bus. Watch this play out in real time over the coming months. The scapegoat is already chosen.
As it is. Where does China fall into all of this? You're a Chinese Canadian, you're based in Beijing. China clearly stands to gain from a failed US war with Iran. How much of your views are reflective of China's views, the Chinese government's views, the CCP's views?
Right. So the official Chinese Communist Party line is that China is committed to global peace and to global trade that benefits all. China wants a win-win globalized system in which people are trading peacefully and which everyone is committed to world peace. And so China has come out vocally criticizing both Iran and the United States. The United States for starting this war, but also Iran for attacking the GCC energy infrastructure. Remember that China relies heavily on Qatar liquefied natural gas, as is the case with other countries in Europe. So China looks at what's happening in the Middle East, and China, I think, is working very hard diplomatically to come to an agreement. Unfortunately, right now, China doesn't have much leverage over either the United States or Iran. In fact, many analysts believe that this war was started in part to economically strangle China, because China depends on a lot of its economy. A lot of its economy is based on accessing cheap energy from overseas. Specifically the GCC. China imports 40% of its energy needs from the GCC. And so if the GCC were to stop energy production, then the Chinese economy would be in a lot of trouble. And this would give Trump a lot of negotiating leverage over China in the upcoming talks scheduled for mid-May. And I believe that what's going to happen is that because the Chinese are extremely pragmatic and very business-orientated, then I think that Trump and China will sign a landmark deal where China agrees to buy a lot of energy from North America.
Now here is where the whole story gets even bigger, because this was never just about Iran. Mehdi framed it perfectly when he said China clearly stands to gain from a failed US war with Iran, and Jiang took that and pulled the curtain back on the actual geopolitical chess game happening underneath all of this. When Jiang said this war was started in part to economically strangle China, that reframes everything. The bombs falling in the Middle East, the Marines being deployed, the Strait of Hormuz, tensions, all of it connects back to a trade war fought through energy markets. Because here is the part most people never hear on cable news. Jiang pointed out that China imports 40% of its energy needs from the GCC. 40%. If you can choke off that supply, even temporarily, you put one of the largest economies on the planet on its knees without firing a single shot at it directly. This is why I keep saying foreign policy is never about what they tell you it is about. The headlines say democracy and security and stability. The reality is leverage, oil, and trade negotiations scheduled for next month. And Jiang made one prediction at the end that I want everyone to remember. He He said the Chinese are extremely pragmatic and very business-oriented. Translation, expect a deal, expect a handshake, expect both sides to walk away talking tough in public while quietly carving up energy contracts in private. That is how empires actually negotiate, not with morality, with math. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.